Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm excited and delighted to welcome Arif Ajakia ji. Arif Ajakia ji, namaskar. Before I start, I would like to say a disclaimer. The discussion points and views expressed on this program is for knowledge sharing purposes only. We have no intentions of harming anyone's emotions or distorting the facts. This is just an information session. So before I start with RFG and give a bit of a bio about him, I would like to tell about the Facts Research Group, which is a non-religious, non-political, non-sponsored, non-aligned group of volunteers to rebut false and malicious propaganda against democracies and present real facts, particularly to foreign media and the Australian politicians, since most of us are from Australia. It has been formed recently and is a think tank and policy group based out of Sydney, Australia. And today we have Arif Ajakia. Now, who doesn't know about Arif Ajakia? He is a Pakistani human rights activist and a YouTuber. His YouTube channel has got around 212,000 subscribers. And one of his programs is Arif Ki Basha, which is loved by everyone. Arif ji was born to a Muhajir Memon family. And I'm saying some words which might be which some people might not like, but I'm giving you a bio of Arif ji. He is from Gujarat originally and then migrated to Karachi post-partition. He has stayed in Karachi till 1984, after which he left for Saudi Arabia, and then after that he went to France and Belgium also. Now Arif ji worked for Afro-Asian People's Solidarity Organization. Arif ji was a politician in the Muttahida Qawmi Movement, MQM, how we know it, which is a Pakistan-based party. He was also the former mayor of Jamshed Town, Karachi, from 2005 to 2007, for those who don't know that. But he had to leave for Europe due to fears for his safety within Pakistan. And he has been in exile since then because of the human rights work which he used to do, and he speaks about very frankly, and he speaks a lot about Pakistan administered Kashmir, POK, Gilgit Balochistan. He's a critic of human rights violation conducted by the Pakistan Army. In fact, in 2019, on the 11th anniversary of the 2008 Mumbai blasts, Arif ji joined other human rights activists in Geneva, calling for an embargo of Pakistan and for the army generals to be convicted for their alleged war crimes before the ICJ, International Court of Justice. In fact, Arif ji praised the Home Minister of India, Amit Shah, and Prime Minister Modi for passing the Citizen Amendment Bill, the Citizen Amendment Act for that matter. And those of you who don't know about Arif ji, this is also what he did. At a protest outside the Chinese embassy in London in July 2020, Arif ji sang Vande Mataram for the first time, joining Pakistani activists, including Amjad Ayub Mirza, calling for boycott of China due to their expansionist policies. Now, that is about Arif ji, the panel, the go-to-man panel for today. Now, Arif ji, as you know, welcome to the show. And do you have something to say before I start? Today's topic is Pakistan, the Inside Story. And because you are from Pakistan and you have lived your whole life till in Pakistan, do you have something to start as a starting remarks? And then we will go on to 10, 15 different issues which I have for you.
First of all, namaskar, and thank you very much for inviting me. It's an honor to speak in front of such distinguished people. Australia is a country which I have loved a lot because of cricket. And I was in Sydney in 2006 for the marriage of my niece who lives in Sydney. So people in Australia are very kind, very sportive, and it's always an honor to speak in front of Australian audience. About Pakistan, I was born in Pakistan, but I consider myself as Indian origin, born in Pakistan, because I'm Pakistani since 70 years, but I'm Indian since thousands of years. and my ancestors were living there. My father, my mother, they both were born in India, in Gujarat. So I feel very much close to my that native land and that native religion also, because we are in Pakistan taught hatred against the Hinduism and India both. But it did not come in myself, because my parents were in very much love with their native land, and they used to speak so kindly and so with so much of love about their homeland. So I had always a close feeling for my native land, and especially Pakistan was created for some special purposes out of India. So it never survived as a country, as a homeland for people, because first of all, when a people run away from their origin and they try to find their origin in Arab and Turk origin, of course they lose their identity, and we are a bunch of people with lost identity in Pakistan. So I started realizing that my country is India. And when I say India, it is India from Rangoon till Kabul. It's not that I'm an advocate of Akhand Bharat, but I consider that these people are all same, divided into different religion, different ethnicity. So I'm from these people, which is between Kabul and Rangoon. And we all are same, but because some special designs, we are divided. So rest I will leave on you, on your questions, and then we can move forward.
Thank you, Arafji. Just for our audience, Pakistan, officially known as the Islamic Republic of Pakistan, is the world's fifth most populous country, with population exceeding 200 million. It has the world's second largest Muslim population, I would say, and 33rd largest country by area on this globe. Pakistan has its own good things. They have got 6 designated UNESCO-based heritage sites. Now they have got 2 Pakistanis who have got Nobel Prize since 1947. One was Abdus Salam and the other one was Malala Yousaf, who shared it with Kailash Satyarthi from India. Though. Now all of those good things, obviously, and they have come out of India. Means till 1947, it was all the same, as you said. But what changed after that? Now we're going to talk about some points which, from my perspective, is important to know, because I come from a border town, a border state, which is Jammu and Kashmir. I'm from Jammu and Kashmir myself. Now we have bore the brunt of the terrorism in our state, and we are victims, Kashmiri Hindus for that matter. Now let us start from the human rights. What is the status of human rights in Pakistan? What is happening in there? What has happened to Ahmadis? What has happened to Hindus? What has happened to Christians? Because as we all know, at the time of partition, Hindus were around 23% of the population, RFG. But if you talk of now, the percentage is less than 3%, and those who are there are either forcibly converted, girls kidnapped, and same goes for Sikhs as an example. It just happened a couple of weeks back. A Sikh girl was abducted and married to a Muslim, and then when people revolted against it, the just mob came and they had to accept the fact that she was a Muslim now. Now, if she did it on her own, obviously there's no question about it, but it was forced on her. Now, what do you talk about when you talk of human rights violation? Can you throw some light on, from coming from Pakistan and being an ex-mayor of Karachi town? Can you say something about it?
Well, Pakistan is a country where nobody knows what human rights are, because they never existed in Pakistan. I'm working in human rights field since 1994. First time attended United Nations Human Rights Council session in 1994, and since then I'm regularly attending these sessions. With European Parliament, I have worked extensively for human rights issues in Pakistan. In Pakistan, there are two kind of minorities: religious minorities and ethno-linguistic minorities. The ethno-linguistic minorities are Sindhis, Baloch, Pashtun, Muhajirs, Hindko, Hazara, Kashmiris, Gilgiti, Balti, Seraiki. and the dominant group is Punjabi. Punjabis, on the might of their army, have usurped all the human rights of remaining communities. Before 1971, Punjabis were also a ethnic minority in Pakistan, but ruled Pakistan on the might of their army and ruled brutally over 55% Pakistanis who lived in East Pakistan, now Bangladesh. They committed their genocide in 1971 and gratefully to India that the Bengalis got independence. If India would not have helped Bengalis, today, still today, they would have faced that genocide. But it is because of Indian support that they got independence, and now you can see that Bangladesh economy is booming, and Bangladesh is living peacefully, and there are no major issues. I know there are some issues with religious minorities in Bangladesh, but this is not a matter of a single country. It is matter of the religion, because in Islam we are taught right from the beginning when a child goes to madrasa that you, the Muslim who recite La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah, is better than others, and only you are correct. So there comes the superiority complex, and a complex that shows every Muslim that you are better, you are superior, you are born to rule non-Muslims. So that is a message of the religion. Because of that, religious minorities in Islamic majority countries suffer everywhere, not only in Bangladesh or Pakistan or Afghanistan, but everywhere.
So
So this is
Arifji, just on that point, sorry, just on that point, aren't my understanding is Ahmadiyas are also practicing Islam. Now, why are they banned from declaring or propagating their faith publicly in Pakistan?
you know, in Islam, the basic is that you become Muslim when you recite La ilaha illallah Muhammadur Rasulullah. Now, Muhammadur Rasulullah means Muhammad is the prophet of Islam. Muhammad, the prophet, had said that I am last prophet. While Ahmadiyas believe that there was another prophet born in Qadian, India, Ahmad Qadiani, Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani. So there the difference comes. And in 1974, I guess, that in the Parliament of Pakistan, Zulfikar Ali Bhutto introduced a bill claiming that Ahmadiyas cannot call themselves Muslims because they don't believe that Muhammad is the last prophet, and they believe that Ghulam Ahmad Qadiani was another prophet. So basically the practice of religion is same of Ahmadiyya and Muslims. The difference comes only on this point, and because of that, the Parliament of Pakistan unanimously declared them as kafirs, as non-Muslims, and they cannot call their mosque as masjid. They cannot call themselves Muslims. While Ahmadiyyas, who are majority in Europe, in Germany and England, they claim themselves that they are Muslims, and all the other sects of Islam like Sunni, Shia, they are kafirs. So this is the claim of Ahmadiyyas. So this is the difference. But Pakistan, in India, Ahmadiyyas are not declared as non-Muslim. In other countries, they are not declared as non-Muslims. Only in Pakistan, they are declared non-Muslims. So in Pakistani perspective, Ahmadiyyas are also religious minority.
Okay.
But when we talk to Ahmadiyya people, when in United Nations, and when I meet them and I ask them that why don't you raise your issues, and they say that we are not religious minorities. We are the Muslims of Pakistan. You are not Muslims. So this is a difference of a certain point in the religion. But yes, in Pakistan, as you said, that Hindus are decreasing very rapidly because of that forced conversion, that enforced conversion. Now, forced conversion, we know that there are so many reports, and more than 1,000 Hindu, Sikh, and Christian girls are kidnapped every year. On average, 3 girls per day. They are raped and then forcefully converted and married to that rapist, thus becoming sex slave for life. this is happening. Rinke Kumari's case is very horrific. She told to her parents that please go to India because until you are in Pakistan, I cannot commit suicide. And I'm forced to eat beef. I'm forced to do so many things against my ancestral religion, my original religion, which is Hinduism, and I'm forcefully converted and I want to commit suicide. But they said that if you will do anything wrong, we will kill your family. So because of you, I am not able to commit suicide. So please go to India so that I can commit suicide. So this is the common practice going on in Pakistan. And then ethnic minorities, they are facing another kind of genocide like Baloch people, because Balochistan is a land of resources, and to exploit those resources, Pakistan, Punjabi army and Chinese army are exploiting those resources and committing genocide of Baloch people. Balochistan was an independent land, and it is forcefully occupied, illegally occupied by Pakistan. Same cases with Sindh, with KPK. In KPK, they have the terrorists are created from Pashtun community like Taliban and all this, and the victims are also Pashtun. So that is another kind of game going on in KPK and Afghanistan. So yes, this is the situation of human rights in Pakistan, where basically they don't know what human rights are because they never enjoyed their human rights.
In fact, I was reading in an article, I think from Hudson Research, I was having a look at that. Now, total 3% of the population is non-Muslim in Pakistan, and out of which Hindus are 1.6%, Christians are 1.59%, and rest are like Ahmadiyyas are 0.2%, scheduled caste, scheduled tribes 0.25%. Now this is crazy to hear. Means you have gone through, you have lived there, but it's crazy for me to hear what some human can do to other human. But let us park this discussion on this point and go on to the democracy or lack of democracy, if you may call it, because we know that most of the duration in Pakistan's history when it became an independent nation has been run by army. It still might be now. I was reading Asma Jahangir, as she was a very good, very well known human rights activist in Pakistan. Now, even in their annual report, which they have submitted to the government, it's very clearly written that the fundamental rights of a normal Pakistani are not there because it gets superseded by somebody who's in the army and who doesn't know about the dictatorship of Ayub Khan, Ziaul Haq in the past. Now, any thoughts on that? How is the army? I've heard that army is an industry within Pakistan. Is it true? Do they control everything within Pakistan?
Well, you said that most of the time Pakistan was ruled by army. I would say that all the time Pakistan was ruled by army. Whenever there was a democracy, so-called democracy, it was a controlled democracy. For example, who does not know that current Prime Minister Imran Khan was selected by army, not elected by Pakistanis? He, like his all other previous prime ministers. For example, I would say that in 1988, when Benazir Bhutto became prime minister, and after 20 months, she was sacked, and she said that I was not allowed to go to Kahota. Kahota being the atomic plant, nuclear plant of Pakistan, and she said that I was always considered as a security risk. Now, what kind of democracy
Wow.
is it that the prime minister was not allowed? And it is on record that what she said. Nawaz Sharif, we all know that Prime Minister Modi came to visit Nawaz Sharif, and they wanted to have normal relationships between India and Pakistan, and army does not like it, because the question is that Pakistan spends more than 50% on army. Now, why do we need army? The question is, why do we need army? Because India can say that we need an army because we have China, an enemy, and to secure India. But Pakistan, born out of India, it is same like that my children are getting older and they want to live separately. I get another house for them and they live there. So they are not my enemies. So the same thing that Pakistan became, Pakistan used to be a part of India, separated. Same people live on both sides of border. So why they consider them India as an army? This is an special purpose of creation of Pakistan, because the West, after losing, winning Second World War, but they lost their glorious past, their power, especially Europe. So they had to leave India, and they could not leave one India, because one India would have become a superpower without any regional issues. So they divided India and they left Kashmir and some other regional issues, so that they keep fighting, and their potential, India's potential of becoming a superpower, does not become reality. So Pakistan was created for that purpose. The army of Pakistan, majority of them come from Punjab. They wanted to keep their hegemony, their control on Pakistan. So they created an enemy out of India, that India is our enemy, Hindus are our enemy, so that there is a reason for sustenance of army. So army rules Pakistan, whether it is democracy or whether it is a martial law. Musharraf ruled for 11 years. After he left, there was a controlled democracy. Pakistan's foreign minister is always appointed from the consent, with the consent of Pakistan army. There are 5-6 core issues which no democratic government is allowed to even talk about. For example, Balochistan is totally under control of Pakistan army since 1971. The Karachi, 60% land of Karachi is under cantonment, direct rule of military. Rangers, which is a segment of Pakistan army serving general heads, Sindh Rangers. Rangers is in Karachi since 1991, superseding local police and ruling Karachi and Sindh. Karachi is capital of Sindh province. Sindh is a very resourceful province. This is also controlled by army. Then Kashmir, the policy of Jammu and Kashmir is drafted by Pakistan army. Then nuclear plant, military spending, military budget, and relationship with India. All these matters are decided by army, and no civilian government ever even can speak about it. Afghanistan and India are the biggest markets of Pakistan's export. What Pakistan exports? Terrorism. For the export of terrorism, the biggest markets of Pakistan army is India and Afghanistan. So all these are regions which are interesting for Pakistan army. Thus, civilian governments have very petty things to decide, like Imran Khan often speaks about chicken and eggs and cows and these kind of small petty issues. Basically, civilian political governments are allowed to do corruption. You survive on corruption, but don't speak about these issues, because these are the core issues and decided by Pakistan army. So Pakistan is an Islamic republic, but it is neither Islamic nor republic. It has never enjoyed democracy. We don't know what democracy is.
Arif bhai, which takes me to the other question which you touched on in your speech. Now, army being army, what they have done, and corruption being a part of it, terrorism and radicalization are two things which go hand in hand, at least from that region which I can think of. Now, Pakistan has been on FATF list since June 2018, and day before yesterday also, when they had to choose between keeping it in the gray list or putting it in the black list, they chose to keep it in the gray list, giving some more time to them to handle their operations on the ground. Now, because there are terrorist organizations like Jamaatul Dowa, JEM, Hizbul Mujahideen, who are getting support locally from different launch pads in either POK or the Northwest Frontier province or near the Afghanistan border. Now, does radicalization happen first, or chicken and egg scenario? Is terrorism and radicalization connected to each other?
Well, Pakistan before 1979 was not that much radicalized, and when I was in my childhood in Pakistan, there was majority of Sunni sect. But this Wahhabization of the society came after 1979 Afghan war, and when Ziaul Haq during Ziaul Haq's time, hundreds of thousands of madrasas of Wahhabi sect Devbandi are close to Wahhabization. Now, for example, in India, you never heard of Tablighi Jamaat, but now they are very influential even in India also. They are also a part of Wahhabi. Prince Mohammed bin Salman had said a couple of years ago in America, during an interview, that on the instructions of CIA, we created many madrasas in Pakistan, in India, in Bangladesh, and in Europe also. We created many madrasas and we invested billions of dollars in radicalization of society. So this was radicalized by West to fight so-called communism. To fight communism, they created a bunch of people, terrorists from around the world, like Osama bin Laden, Ayman al-Zawahiri, Abu Faraj al-Libi, and so on. Abu Zubaydah, they were all not Pakistanis. They were imported in Pakistan to fight so-called communism in Afghanistan. And communism was defeated in 1988 and West left the mess behind. Now, in a poor society like Pakistan and Afghanistan, those madrasas are running even today, and they teach intolerance. And when you teach intolerance to every person of your society, a society of intolerable people comes up. Now, about terrorism. Since 1979, Pakistan Army, not Pakistan the country, Pakistan Army is earning billions of dollars on the name of terrorism. Its markets are Kashmir, Punjab of India, entire India, and Afghanistan. These are majority of activities of Pakistan Army. But the terrorism created by Pakistan is global. Now, for example, in France, a man cuts throat of 4 people was a Pakistani. During Black Lives Matters protest in United States, a girl called Tuba, Pakistani origin girl, was arrested throwing a petrol bomb in a police car. So wherever you will find a terrorist in the world, now for example, your Australian terrorist who killed so many in the mosque in New Zealand, he visited Pakistan twice. So you cannot become a terrorist until you get certificate from a University of Pakistan. So wherever you will find a terrorist, you raise the tail of the terrorist and you will see stamp made in Pakistan. So terrorism is a basic product of Pakistan's army, which is exported globally, especially India is their favorite market, and Afghanistan. My question is that FATF, they don't know Pakistan is the master of terrorism, global terrorism. They know everything. West has created Pakistan, and in Indian movies, we often say that a politician, a corrupt politician, he creates goons in different areas to keep his control over people. So those goons, they fight for that politician. So Pakistan is a goon of West, created for some purposes to counter potential superpower of India, to counter communism. So FATF is keeping their eyes closed. Otherwise, they have all proofs that Pakistan is mastermind of terrorism. Pakistan army is involved in all kind of terrorism, and they should be on the top of blacklist forever. There should be an embargo, not only embargo, bring Pakistan's retired and current generals to International Court of Justice under war crime tribunals because they are committing genocide of Pakistanis, they are committing terrorism. Pakistan is involved in state terrorism against their own people and cross-border terrorism.
I think for people who do not know about what we are talking of with regards to the FATF, people who don't know about it, FATF is Financial Action Task Force, and Pakistan has been on its list since a long time now. Now, the key is that China, Turkey, and Malaysia are three countries which are helping Pakistan, I would say, to not go into that blacklist. While as Pakistan needs 12 votes out of 39 countries of the world to exit the grey list and go to the white list. But it has not got those 12 votes out of the whole world. It has got only three till now. It might be working on something, but that is, and the two countries which are on the blacklists are North Korea and Iran. So those are the only two countries on the blacklist right now. And if Pakistan joins in June 2021, which is when FATF will be doing an extraordinary plenary session again to talk and discuss and finalize if they want to move Pakistan from that grey list to the blacklist, that will be in June. So let us wait for that and see what happens in there. Okay, so you talked about radicalization, you talk of terrorism. Now, nuclear threat is something which, while I was in India and most of the people who are in India, they normally often hear Pakistan say it off and on. And it's a bluff which Pakistan has been saying it, like, for example, the Balakot strikes. When the Balakot strikes was done by the Indian Army and Air Force, Pakistan would normally say, we have a nuclear weapon, don't even try it with us. Don't touch our launch pads because we have the right to support terrorists. In a way, they were saying that. But when India attacked those launch pads and came back successfully, now nuclear threat was kind of a bluff. Everyone knew it. Now, what do you have to say about the nuclear button which Pakistan has? Is it a threat or is it using as a bluff with the Western world, with its Western countries who it is a friend with, potentially US and UK as an example, or with China and others?
Well, I think that Pakistan's military program, especially the nuclear program, is under the control of United States of America. And America knows about most of its operational activities.
Okay.
So I don't think that without any approval of United States of America and West, they can do anything about nuclear button. It is just like a common, it's a small fear or threat that they use it as a threat, but I don't think that they are capable of using it.
Mhm.
But still, you cannot underestimate terrorists. Terrorists can do anything, and Pakistan, of course, is a very strong military with weaponry like missile systems and all these things.
Mm.
And then you have another point in this thing is that China is a bigger Satan than Pakistan. So both China and Pakistan, they don't like India. So if there is a problem with India, of course, anything can happen. We cannot underestimate. But still, I think that Pakistan's nuclear program is under the radar of United States of America,
Mhm.
and they cannot do anything because nobody can afford a nuclear bomb.
Okay.
Nuclear
Thanks,
bomb is not
Arif bhai.
confined to a region because nuclear explosion during a war is harmful for entire region, not for a particular country.
Yes.
And I don't think that it will be a possibility, God forbid.
Arif bhai, I have two, three more questions. One is about the society, and I will just take a small break in saying those things to you. One is about the society and what is the place of women in the society. That's one. Because I have read a book called as Asha Bibi's, and I have heard about her story. And again, it goes back to the minority issues and minority rights, but I'm going to talk about that. And then we'll talk about regions like Sindh, Baluchistan, POK also. But while I go to those points, I would request everyone on the call, if you have got any questions after I finish these two, please be ready with those questions so that you can ask Arif Bhai about that. So Arif Bhai, coming to the society and place of women in the society, Now, again, coming from the Indian subcontinent myself, woman is treated as a god, goddesses in India, in the Indian Hindutva culture, I would say. Now, I assume, because I have lived half part of my life with Muslims as my neighbors, Muslims as my friends in Jammu and Kashmir, till that genocide happened with us, and we were kind of pushed to leave the place, which was our original homeland. And and women in our society is like goddess. We treat them as goddess. Now, what is there anything different in Pakistan?
Well, in Pakistan and in Islam, women are used as a commodity. It is a property of man. And in Islam, in Quran itself says that women are your properties and you can use it as you want. So it is a commodity. The only purpose of a woman's life in Islamic society is to keep their husband satisfied, keep their men satisfied. That is the only reason of their existence. And sadly, it is quite different than Indian culture. Sanatan Dharam gives a very great role to women, and but in Islam, we do say that it is only Islam that gives all rights to women and this and that, but we don't believe in that, because a woman's testimony in court cases is half than a man's testimony. A woman's share in inheritance is half than a man. For example, when my father died, the heritage was divided between we two brothers and two sisters, and sisters were paid half than me. And when I said that, why don't we have equal share? Because I don't believe in this, and my sisters refused to take more because they said that it will be a burden on the dead body of my parents, because it is Islam. So this is the society for women in Pakistan.
Wow.
The same thing is that a man can have 4 wives. Now, what justice you can provide when you have 4 different wives? Then there are so many things. If I go in details, that, for example, Islam says that if a man has a sexual desire, a woman has to fulfill that at every condition, at every, even whatever she is dying, she is very sick, she has to satisfy a sexual desire of her husband. This is Islam. And I'm sorry to say this is true also, because I'm not saying anything from myself. This is recorded on different scholars' speeches. So, as a woman, I won't say that there are any rights for Muslim women. Their only duty, their only purpose of existence is to satisfy their men, is to obey their men, and remain subservient. For example, the mullahs of Islam, they don't allow a woman to even show her face to common men. In Islam, a woman cannot go out of her home without permission of her man. So these kind of restrictions show that women have no right in Islamic society.
I just can't fathom some of the things, Arif bhai, so I'm just trying to digest some of the things. Okay, I think I leave that topic as is for the time being. Coming to Sindh, Baluchistan, POK, now we have heard in some part of the media, and the Western media doesn't show it that much. There has been a bid by Sindh people, Baluchis, and Pakistan occupied Kashmiri people to break away from Pakistan. Now, which is not shown in any part of the media or mainstream media, I would say. You can see it on social media a bit. Sindh being one of the 3rd largest provinces in Pakistan, Balochistan is a strategic place because of its natural resource. And POK, we all know, because it is an Indian part of Kashmir, Jammu and Kashmir, which they occupied illegally in 1947, which they called Azad Kashmir. And there's nothing Azad about that Kashmir, because it's all controlled by the army, and has very beautiful places like Gilgit-Baltistan. One of the most amazing places I have seen but again, after Article 370 was squashed by the Narendra Modi government on 5th of August 2019, now there are some people within India and otherwise who want the government of India to take back those places. Now there is definite uh, chorus for POK to be got back into India. And there are people who go by Sindh and Baluchistan also for the same cases. Now, what is, and there is, I'm not talking of Aksai Chin, which has been handed over to China by Pakistan after the war, just to keep themselves in the good books of China. Now, do you have any inside information about Sindhis, Balochis, and POK people? What their thoughts are? How are they treated? What do they want?
Gilgit-Baltistan and POK is India. So it is a land of India occupied by Pakistan, and it is up to India when they take it back. And people in this region have no basic right. As in the beginning also, I said that in Pakistan, generally people, they don't have any rights. They are not free. They are under this dictatorship of Pakistan army. Now there is involvement of Chinese army also, and Gilgit-Baltistan is almost every part of Gilgit-Baltistan is under control of China now. Coming to Balochistan, Balochistan in fact was never part of India, British India. And Balochistan during British India was an independent state. And it had some agreements with British. Under that agreement, they had given control of Quetta city to British for their cantonment use. Otherwise, Balochistan remained autonomous region during British part also. On 11 August 1947, 3 days before creation of Pakistan and independence of India, Balochistan got independent. And the embassy of Balochistan under the name of Kallat, Riyasat-e-Kallat. Now, Kallat being Balochistan is a tribal society. So all the tribes were represented by Khan of Kallat. So Kallat being Balochistan. So the embassy of Riyasat-e-Balochistan was created in Gandhi Garden, Karachi. Balochistan's independence was accepted by both India and Pakistan.
Yes.
Both governments, Jawaharlal Nehru government and Jinnah government of Pakistan, they both had accepted independence of Balochistan on 11 August 1947. But Jinnah, who was lawyer of Khan of Kallat during British period, and he used to fight their cases in courts.
Mhm.
He sent a message to Khan of Kallat that you join Pakistan, you sign accession treaty with Pakistan, and he refused. So Jinnah sent army to Balochistan, and current Khan of Kallat, who lives in London, Suleiman Dawood, he has many times said in interviews that my father was forced on gunpoint to sign accession treaty with Pakistan. So Balochistan is an occupied land, and Baloch are demanding independence from Pakistan right since 1948, especially their armed struggle started in 1972-73. And when gratefully to Shrimati Indira Gandhi ji, that 93,000 covert Pakistan army personnel who were under Indian prisoners of war, they were released, they were jobless. So Zulfikar Ali Bhutto sent them to Balochistan to fight against this independent movement. So since then, Baloch are facing F-16 bombardment, air gunship bombardments, and a genocide of their people is going on, and Baloch are asking for independence. The situation of Balochistan is very much volatile, and they want independence, nothing else, which is their right. Coming to Sindh, when Muslim League was demanding for independent Pakistan, independent country for Muslims of India, the proposed Pakistan, West Pakistan, they had 4 parts: Sindh, Balochistan, Pakhtun, and Punjab. Punjab was ruled by Unionist Party, which was against division of India.
Mhm.
Sindh had a hung parliament, and when the bill for independent Pakistan was presented in Sindh province, Jinnah promised them that in proposed Pakistan, Sindh will be an autonomous region and you will have autonomy. So on that promise, Sindh Assembly passed a resolution, the only assembly that passed a resolution to support of Pakistan in the entire undivided India was Sindh Assembly. But that was on the promise to GM Syed, Sain GM Syed. And right from 1948, Sain GM Syed realized that he has committed a huge mistake to join Pakistan. And since then, Sain GM Syed was struggling, fighting for independent Sindhu Desh, which is going on even today. So there is a movement, genuine movement of Sindhu Desh, independent Sindhu Desh from Punjabi army.
Mhm.
KPK. Now KPK is a Pakhtun area. And when during British India time, there were fights with Afghanistan. And KPK used to be part of Afghanistan. Part of India also, because during Maharaja Ranjit Singh, India ruled until Kabul. So it was part of India also. But then when British came, Afghans, they got quite much their areas recaptured. British created Durand Line right between Pakhtun areas. And Pakhtuns, they don't accept this Durand Line. And when Pakistan was created, Afghanistan was the only country which did not recognize Pakistan. They said, because of this Durand Line, we don't accept Pakistan as an independent state. Pakhtuns, they were very much in Pakistan army. They were used by Punjabi army.
Mhm.
Now, during Afghan war, the terrorist groups were Pakhtun also, Taliban and all these things. For invasion in Kashmir in 1948, these Pakhtun tribes were used. And the tribal area invasion to Kashmir was done by Pakhtuns also. But very lately, Pakhtun have realized that we are victim of terrorism and we are branded as international terrorists also. So PTM, the Pakhtun Tahfuz movement, now is asking for their rights and they want to join Afghanistan as a greater Afghanistan. So Pakistan, basically only Punjab is enjoying everything. Rest, everyone is asking for their independence or for their rights.
Thank you, Arif bhai. I think those were all the questions or some of the thoughts which I had put in my mind to ask you and get some more clarity as we have. From the audience, if anyone would want to start asking questions, I have got one question in the chat from Rajiv Arora ji. Rajiv ji, you want to ask it? Okay, so he's asking, given the common heritage we share, do we see scope for peaceful coexistence in the foreseeable future?
Simple question, reply is no. Because if there is a peaceful coexistence, what will be the reason for existence of Pakistan army? Because then there is no reason. People will ask, the West will ask, the people of Pakistan will ask that why do we spend so much on defense when we don't have an enemy? Because in Pakistani cards, there is only one enemy, India. China is our friend. Iran, we don't have any problem. Afghanistan, we don't have any problem. So where is the problem? India. So if there is a peaceful agreement or peaceful existence, we don't need an army. And army would never allow to have peace in the region.
Okay, Arif bhai. Devinder ji, you had some questions?
Yeah, I have few questions. I think Arifji is very right. The very existence of Pakistani army is justified on the basis of having an enemy in India. Whenever I meet a Pakistani, I tell him that, and he doesn't know it. But Arif bhai ने बहुत बड़ा खुलासा किया, for which I am very grateful to him. He agreed with my views. The question I have is, why is this inside story of Pakistan not shown in the Western media? Because I've been to many countries in the West. I've worked in USA, I've been in UK, now in Australia. Now, what you're talking about, Arifji, we know because we watch YouTube and some other channels, and but other than that, no Western media tells what you're telling. And even in India, the atmosphere as such, I don't know whether you are aware or not. Up till the time I was in India, any news from Pakistan was no news. वो कहते हैं ये चूहा है पड़ा हुआ है, who bothers? They rather watch the news from America, UK, because most of the NRIs are working there, you know. But now it is high time that the things you are saying, they need to come out because they have gone beyond control. So why do you think the Western media is not opening up this Pandora's box on Pakistan as you have?
Actually, as I told you that Pakistan is a goon created by West. Now, left media, just tell me one thing, that West media and West celebrities are speaking so much against farmers' protest in India. But there was a
Yes.
farmer protest in Pakistan also. About thousands of tractors were on the road. Did you hear about it? Nobody hears
No.
about it. There is a genocide going on of Baloch people. There are protests in front of Islamabad Press Club, Karachi Press Club, Lahore Press Club since years. There are march from Karachi till Islamabad on foot, 1,000 kilometer of Baloch and Sindhi people. For missing people, there are thousands of missing people. You will never hear these stories in West. Now, I have always complained in my videos and statements that India is weak on that point because it is diplomatic level or media, international media speaks so much against India where there is no problem of human rights as such. You will see that religious minorities, they are enjoying their every right in India, but still the West is speaking that there is a Hindu Hindu militant monk is chief minister of UP. There is Hindutva, Hindu extremist government in India. While every religion is peacefully enjoying, there are 5-time azan on loudspeaker. 84% non-Muslims are hearing that azan 5 times, where it is said, La ilaha illallah, there is no God except Allah. You cannot say there is no God except Bhagwan Shankar or Bhagwan Krishna on loudspeaker in India, but still you are saying to every Hindu that you have a false God. That much right are enjoyed in, we don't hear azan in Europe, in America, in Australia on loudspeaker, but in India, yes. On Friday, in India, Friday prayers are performed on streets, blocking all the roads. Every
Yes.
mosque after 5 times prayer in India, the Molvi says, Ya Allah, kafiron ko barbad kar. Who are those kafir? 84% Indians. This happens and still West is speaking against India that India has Hindu extremist government and this and that. Nobody speaks about Pakistan because Pakistan spends very much on international lobbying and Pakistan has a very strong lobbying. This is a very a case which Indian hierarchy has to address. They have to come forward on lobbying.
And lobbying, or also, as you said, Pakistan is their goon, so they cannot go against it. I think that is a very good point, which we didn't know up till now. And there is much about it, I think. But having said that, now since the Cold War with Russia is over, and Pakistan has no interest of West to serve really, because it has no common border with Soviet Union. Soviet Union is gone. But India has border with Kashmir, and Kashmir, with the Chinese, and China is seen as a rising superpower and a enemy that has been replaced from Soviet Union to China. So their sudden interest in India has come up. So in that light, how do you see the role of Pakistan? Will it still be goon of West or nothing will change?
Well, until President Trump was president of United States, things were changing. After Reagan, President Trump was only president when America did not bombard any other country. His period was of non-war. He started pulling his troops from Iraq and Afghanistan, and he created an atmosphere of friendship between Arabs and Jews. It is first time happened in thousands of years that they started coexisting, and the friendship grew up. But now, since President Biden, in last 1 month, 3 countries are bombarded: Somalia, Iraq, and Syria are being bombarded. So American economy basically grows on arms trade, and arms and ammunition is traded more during wartime. So wars are basically needs of America, and for that they need Pakistan, especially to keep Afghan war open and all these things. So Pakistan is an ally of West in that front. Now coming to your point about China and India, West has started realizing that China is a global threat, and
Yes.
China has an expansionist mindset, a colonial mindset. Small China has become huge, occupying Uyghur lands, which was East Turkestan, occupying Tibet, Hong Kong, Macau. So, and Taiwan also, it's an independent state, but China is not allowing the world to accept its independence. So, China has an expansionist mindset, colonial mindset. And West has realized that if you don't stop this mindset, because already economically China has controlled international markets also. So for that reason, they know that only power on the earth is India that can stop China's expansion, and that can face China. So there are different school of thoughts in West also. One wants to support India and make an alliance with India, and there is a small faction which wants to keep Pakistan alive also. So let's see. I don't know what will happen. It is the beginning of President Biden's term, but it will be very significant period of 4 years that we will see, for
Thank you.
especially for the future of South Asia.
Thank you,
India
Arifji.
has clearly shown its intention of taking back POK and Gilgit-Baltistan. Now let's see if West allows it or not.
Rakesh Bansalji, you have raised your hand. So Devendraji, just one point. Rakesh Bansalji, you want to ask something?
Yes. In view of the recent announcement between the Pakistan Prime Minister and the Indian Prime Minister of the ceasefire and the telephonic conversation of DMOs, Director of Military Operations of both countries, what are your comments?
About what? I could not get your point, sir.
The point is, recently, India and Pakistan, they have announced ceasefire, right? And their directors of military operations have spoken to each other. Now, based on what we heard about military rule and all that, how did it happen, or how do you view it?
This was a shocking news for me also, because I was not expecting any such agreement. And especially when I went in details, I saw that it was done with the efforts of India. And NSA, Ajit Doval Saab was behind all these activities. So I don't know what is the reason, because it goes in favor of Pakistan. It does not go in favor of India. But let's see how long it survives. How long Pakistan restrains from sending its troops to India. There are regular infiltrations in India. For example, last week, a militant, he killed 2 unarmed policemen in Srinagar. Now that is infiltration. This is not a homegrown terrorism. That is Pakistan's product. So ceasefire does not mean only on border. Now there was a ceasefire between India and Pakistan before 26/11/2008 also. But what happened? You cannot trust Pakistan. This is the problem. Because
Shashiji,
Pakistan, on one hand, they keep promising that we will not do anything. On the other hand, the training camps of Jaish-e-Mohammed and Hafiz Saeed and all these things are going on. Now, for what purpose they are being trained? Just to infiltrate in India. You know, one silent point of infiltration is drugs infiltration through Punjab. Because LOC is one part, there is a huge border in Punjab between East and between Pakistani and Indian Punjab. And that is very soft border. And drugs are sent through drones and all these things. This is destroying the basic society also. So there are many ways of infiltration. It is not only LOC, it is not only cross-border firing. It's a huge thing. And let's see, I don't trust Pakistanis. I don't trust that Pakistan will keep this. How long it goes on, let's see.
Shashijanji,
So
you wanted to ask
what you
something.
mean is basically,
This ceasefire agreement between India and Pakistan has initiated between the NSA of Pakistan initially. He had approached the NSA of India, Ajit Doval. It's been going on for the last 2 months. But as such, the ceasefire agreement is a total farce. You know, the army of Pakistan, they helped the terrorists to enter India. Recently, in the last 4 or 5 months, 2 or 3 tunnels have been detected on the Punjab border and on absolutely on the border itself.
Yes,
So I
and,
don't.
and Shashiji, just to add to your point, yesterday I think Delhi police has caught 2 Sikh terrorists, I think criminals they are calling them now, who were on their way to kill Sushil Pandit, who was
Yes.
one of our panelists in our last panel discussions. So they were on way to kill him just because he proposes the Indian point of view very frankly and openly, and they had been given 10 lakh rupees just to kill him, which is
And
absurd.
2 weeks ago, they caught a person in Delhi who had
Yes.
done a recce of Ajit Doval's office and house.
Wow.
They had seen all the plans and everything. They had all the plans to kill him. In fact, Pakistan is mortally scared of Ajit Doval more than the army.
Hmm.
so it seems
China
Pakistani army
has
is buying
recently
time.
withdrawn from Ladakh. China has recently withdrawn from Ladakh because they cannot fight for nuts in the mountains. China cannot fight in the mountains with the Indian army.
And that too in the
No
winter
way they
season.
can do. And in the last 2-3 years, Indian army has got so much defense equipment. They are so well equipped, so well trained. It will be there. I mean, bad luck if they try to pick up a fight with Indian army in the mountains.
Right. Rakeshji, you were saying something, sorry.
Basically, it seems that the Pakistani army is buying time
Yes,
to prepare themselves for
terrorism would
a
continue. Terrorism would continue.
stronger
Yes.
retaliation or stronger reaction or stronger attack.
And all these weeks or months, I'm surprised how are they having that dummy Imran Khan as their president? The
Prime
chief
Minister.
of the army staff should have taken over by now because he is their total puppet.
Any other questions, guys?
Yeah, I have one last question before
Nandji.
Arif Bhai goes. My question to you, Arif Bhai, is recently, they have been mentioned that non-resident Indians in overseas country are not doing much for the cause of India, whereas this Pakistani fellows, they are organizing, such thing like Black Day, and very cheerfully they invited Philip Raddock, rally karte hain. They're doing lots of such thing, and NRI hardly do anything. Although we have NRIs in very key posts like in UK, Priti Patel is there, is going to sign return of Nirav Modi to India. Oh, she's Home Minister. So do you have any message for NRI, non-resident Indians in overseas country that you want to convey to them?
Well, yesterday I was speaking with Indians in America also, in Florida, and they had also the similar question. The problem is that think that there is a basic problem between Indians and Pakistanis, that Indians, Hindus especially, they consider themselves secular. Now, secularism is a form of government. A man cannot be secular. A man has religion or atheist. Either he has a religion or he is atheist. Now, we Indian Hindus are followers of Sanatan Dharam, which is the most beautiful religion on earth. So, isn't it our responsibility to safeguard, to protect this beautiful civilization, religion, and country? But I have a complaint with common NRIs that they are not doing that much. They think that it is responsibility of government of India to only do this. For example, when I was living in Belgium, I spent 20 years in Belgium. In Belgium, whenever there was a protest against India, every Pakistani shopkeeper got a message from Pakistan embassy, and on the day of protest, that shopkeeper, restaurant owner, or any business entity, Pakistani, he will close his business, shop, restaurant, take his staff in his car, and go in front of Indian embassy. There will be 5,000 people protesting against India. But if you ask Indians to do that, you will find hardly 1% Indians coming out. So, considering that it is not our responsibility, it is government of India's responsibility. This country is not of government of India. This country is of every Indian. Now, our children who are raising in these Western societies, they will remain Indian for their lives, because we, after spending generations, also we are called ethnically British Indian. We have a census in England going on from 1st March till 19th March, and there is a column in the form ethnicity, and underneath there is British Indian, British Pakistani, British Bangladesh. This will go for centuries because our color will not change, our DNA will not change. We will remain Indian. So we have to teach our children our civilization, our religion. Gita has to be part of our life. Gita is not confined to Hinduism. Gita is the true secular form of life. Gita does not confine you to one God, that you have to pray, worship this God or you have to worship. Gita confines you to karma, that you have to protect climate, you have to protect plants, you have to protect animal, and you have to protect humanity. So this is the basic message of Gita. Gita says it does not matter which God you pray. It is not important. Important is to protect everything around you.
And
West
also
is
Vishwan
speaking
Kutumba.
about protection of climate today, but Gita speaks about it since thousands of years. So we have to bring this civilization among our own people living outside India, and we have to participate in the activities which can protect our civilization, our country, and our religion.
Perfect. Thank
Thank
you,
you.
Arif bhai.
Thank
Anyone else has any question? Zarir bhai, Rakesh ji, Om ji, Rajiv ji. So which brings us to the end of this session. So Arif bhai, hand-folded namaskar and thank you to you for your time and your views, which we will propagate further down in our country and wherever we can. So thank you for this. We will do one more session with you. We'll be in touch, and thanks a ton for your time. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you very much
Jai
for
Hind.
very
inviting.
much.
It was
Thank
such an
you.
honor to speak to you, and so
Thank you,
nice
sir.
of
Thank you.
you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, sir.